Hello and good day. This is the Bible Bard. A bard is a storyteller who recites traditional texts associated with a particular oral tradition, and I'm here to recite and to amplify what the literature of the Bible says about who is God and who are human beings. And here's the place we are at today. In the first book written in the Bible, it's not Genesis, but it is a book called Job. The writer provides a set of morals and ethics for human beings. And this is a little strange because this is happening way before the law, way before Jesus. This is around 3500 BC or more. And in other words, the writer is detailing for readers what is required to be morally innocent before God. And all this is taken from Job chapter 31. I'm using the NIV. So let's look at what ancient people, before Moses brings the people out of Egypt, they go to the mountain and they get the law from God. Before all of that, here are some moral principles recorded in the Bible way before that time. The first thing Job says is we should not look lustfully. That's verse 1 in the chapter. And it's purity. I'm going to try to summarize it. It's having purity of heart and self-control. The second moral principle he enunciates is there should be no falsehood in verse 5. In other words, we should tell the truth and have moral integrity. The next one is not to be enticed by a woman. In other words, verses 9 and 11 say, no adultery in marriage. And sorry to say this, but this is what it teaches, no unmarried sex. The next thing is about denying justice to servants in verses 13 and 15. And it's teaching us that we need to have respect and fairness for others, even those who work for us. The next one is to keep the poor from their desires. And again, this is the negative. So it's verses 16 and 19, and it's teaching us that we should be generous and compassionate. The next one, the Job list, is not to raise one's hand against the fatherless or orphans, people without protection in a society without a king. This is protection of the vulnerable, and it's a requirement in that society of those who want to be innocent before God. The next is to put my trust in gold. In other words, this is phrased in the negative, do not trust in gold, but instead trust in God rather than money or wealth. The next one says we regard not the sun or moon, verses 26 to 28, same chapter, and that's teaching us to worship only the Creator, not the creation. The next one is shocking from this ancient time. We're not to rejoice at my enemy's misfortune, Job says, verse 29. In other words, forgiveness and mercy even to our enemies sounds familiar, and it takes a few thousand years before that's repeated by Jesus. The next one is Job says people can't say about him who has not been filled with his meat, verses 31 and 32. In other words, Job has been hospitable and generous to others, and that's required of those who want to be innocent before God. And then he says in verse 34, his transgressions are covered. And we're learning that through verbal confession of sin to God, God covered his transgressions. Now, we'll watch the wording in the Bible. Things change over time, and covering of transgressions in the Old Testament changes in the New to removing transgressions or washing them away. Now, then the last one we're going to look at Job says, the land shouldn't cry out against me, in verses 38 through 40. And this is talking about justice to both labor and justice to property itself. There should not be breaking of contracts or defrosting. Now, this list of required morals and ethics is from many years BCE, or maybe about 4,000 years ago. And it was way before the giving of a formal law in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, some 500 years later. Those things were written about 1450 or so BCE. By contrast, if you want to imagine what else was being written at the time, the Code of Hammurabi was written only about 1750 BCE, or 3,700 years ago. So the Bible's views on morality, given way before Hammurabi's code, and the Bible's views are much more detailed and complete than that other code. In the Bible Bard podcast, I previously provided 10 lessons about the 10 Commandments, the Jewish Mosaic Law, that this work in Job precedes. The summary of those 10 Commandments is in Bible Bard Lesson 67, the 10 Words Understood, an introduction. You can get the transcript for that in www.biblebard.org, or you can click it there and listen to it. The reason we look at the moral principles written in the book of Job from the Bible is to identify something critics don't like to hear. What we're identifying is that human morality was based upon the morality and character of God as a very ancient practice. Instead, today, secular biologists, psychologists, rationalists, anthropologists, among others, imagine that moral codes are the result of human solutions to social issues that occurred as early humans gathered in groups as hunter-gatherers or farmers. And they don't see it that moral principles could even have been obtained by humans about and from a God, a transcendent being, way before those times. Secular thinkers often exclude the Bible from their list of references they consult, and they actually, in effect, suppress the evidence because it confounds their argument. So for we who read the literature of the Bible and try without prejudice or presuppositions to simply understand what it says in its history, its stories, and in its transactions or transcriptions of God's statements, this most ancient literature is very instructive. In the moral principles listed in Job and in the table provided in the transcript of this podcast, we listen to ideas later formalized by divinity in the law of Moses. That's way later in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. We also see these same principles in the words of Jesus and Paul that have a lot of references to the authority of these Old Testament passages. For example, Matthew 19, you can read verses 18, 19, Mark 10, verses 19, and then if you go to the book of Romans, chapter 3, verse 31, or chapter 7, verse 12, and then in Galatians 3:24, just to mention a few places where these principles are referenced. The issue for you and me, for modern people of every nation or ethnicity, is should any of this ancient text apply to me? The answer is very clear. Are you a human being? You did not make yourself suddenly appear at this time, did you? You are derivative and you are dependent. You did not choose your parents. You did not choose to be born, but here you are. Those who came before you, even from the most ancient times, observed human behavior, reflected on themselves, and determined that every human being fails to meet the moral standards they derived from a holy, infallible, immortal being. And this failure left them, and it leaves us, in a terrible dilemma. Paul says it this way, "For I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. That's from Romans 7, verse 15 to 19. I've condensed it a bit for the sake of time. This is the dilemma Job laments 4,000 years ago. And the Bible Bard himself laments the truth of Paul's statement in my own life. I think thoughtful listeners to the podcast also have felt the truth of these remarks in their life. This illustrates the human condition relative to the immortal and morally perfect Creator God of the Bible. We mentioned it in the episode Bible Bard 98, 3 Essentials, and in the episode Bible Bard 78, Jesus was an alien, and especially in Bible Bard Lesson 90 about faith and the term born again. Summary: the Bible Bard himself has no philosophical solution to this human problem discussed here. But we've seen within the pages of the Bible a solution offered by God, Jesus, and the writers of the New Testament. In my readings of the literature, going on 70 times through all 1,189 chapters, 1,410 pages, and 726,109 words, I've noticed the Bible gives a solution easy to understand and condenses to a few words in the New Testament and more complicated and prophetic and poetic in the Old Testament. Nevertheless, a consistent, non-contradictory message. And the reason the Bible Bard decided to embark on this podcast himself largely derives from a moment in time when, in crisis, I needed to decide, what do I need to do to continue my life? Do I continue, and here are the options, to look to people, teachers, doctrines, theology, systems, and churches, or do I just need God himself? I decided I just needed God. I needed God to be present in my life. I needed God to be present in my house, not just through his abstract quality of omnipresence. I needed God to be personally present concretely. And I began to read the Bible for myself as literature instead of trying to find within it the ideas promulgated by some authority. The Bible can speak for itself. Yes, human beings want to systematize everything. But how far can the human mind go when trying to systematize the eternal, invisible, immortal, holy, just, and loving Spirit the Bible identifies as God? Instead, we go a verse at a time, attempting to see what the Bible clearly states plainly about God and our human dilemma. Conclusion: this is the way the Bible Bard works. Brief recitations are closely focused, no distractions, no rabbit trails. We're talking about what the literature of the Bible states, the ideas and concepts it presents, because most people have never engaged with biblical thoughts. Make up your own mind whether you agree or disagree with the Bible's pronouncements. After watching or listening to a podcast episode, go to www.biblebard.org to download the transcript of the episode or other episodes so you can read and refer to the content of the podcast. Support the Bible Bard podcast on Patreon. As little as $1 a week or $5 a month helps to cover the costs of the podcast. You can also give at GoFundMe. The Bible Bard himself takes no salary and does not financially benefit from the gifts of supporters to the ministry. And by the way, you can send the Bible Bard any questions, or remarks you care to offer to BibleBardUS@gmail.com. Glad to hear from you. And thank you in advance for following and sharing the Bible Bard content on all the video-based platforms and also on the audio-based platforms. And by the way, we have local Bible Bards who have the Bible Bard in their language. For example, we have it in Urdu, Chigua, Swahili, Hindi, and Spanish. So, until next time, this is the Bible Bard.